Zachipedia, and right now I'd like to briefly discuss an old scientific theory that was proposed wrong about 200 years ago: spontaneous generation. Now, spontaneous generation was basically just a false idea that matter could come from other matter. For example, some people could say that this pencil could randomly come out of a desk. Now, of course, we know that's completely preposterous. However, about 500 years ago in cities like Venice, it was actually very well proposed and backed up by even the most credible of scientists. For example, in the city of Venice, there was well-known butcher shops around, other than shipbuilding places, where people, an average Venetian man, might go walking to one day and might buy a piece of deer meat. Now, he would probably eat a piece of it because deer meat was sold very large, in large quantities, and would put the rest in an animal skin or cloth, as they didn't have refrigerators or ice boxes back then, and put it in a container. Now, for the next few nights, the Venetian man would eat a pieces in increments of the deer meat, until one day, on one of the last pieces, he would see that it was crawling with maggots. Now, he had no idea how those maggots got there, so he and probably other people would have assumed that the maggots would spontaneously arise from the meat. Therefore, that was probably how spontaneous generation came around. Now, in this mid-1600s, a biologist from Venice named Francesco Redi decided that he wanted to prove spontaneous generation wrong once and for all, and show the world that matter or other objects could only come on top of the other matter, and that it couldn't be formed by another piece of matter or an object itself. Therefore, his experiment was that he took 2 jars and filled them both with an equal proportion of meat. One jar, however, he left uncovered, and the other he placed a cheesecloth over. However, he left them for a few days there, and came back afterwards. The results were as he expected. The jar that was uncovered with the meat inside of it had maggots and flies swarming around it, while the one with the cheesecloth was completely normal. Now, many people regarded his experiment as genius, and spontaneous generation was basically proved wrong throughout the rest of the modern world. And I guess that's it, so goodbye. Or so we thought, until something wrong happened. In the early 1800s, after Robert Hooke in the 1600s used the telescope, or the microscope, to see cells, which are now composed of all living things, as we know now, spontaneous generation sort of came back, because the 2 biologists, Matthias Schleiden and Theodor Schwann, ended up coming up with the theory that all plants and animals were composed of cells. However, the cellular theory did not explain where cells came from. So, as all these scientific philosophers deduced, the majority of people ended up deciding that spontaneous generation was the only way to explain where cells came from, that they randomly arose from whatever object they were composed of. Now, in about 1862, even though 5 years earlier, Rudolf Virchow, another scientific philosopher and scholar, proved wrong that cells actually came from other cells, it was still spontaneous generation, was still proposed as the normal theory. Until in 1862, a French chemist named Louis Pasteur decided that he was going to prove once and for all that spontaneous generation was completely false in any form. Therefore, his experiment was that he took 2 test tubes. One test tube he filled with soup broth, and the other one he also filled with soup broth. However, he put on a burner and put it up to about 112 degrees Fahrenheit, or approximately 100 degrees Celsius, the boiling point. Now, he left it like that for about 7 days, and when he came back, the results were as he expected. The soup broth, which was unheated and uncovered, had algae growing on the inside, and the soup was murky. However, the one that had been heated to 112 degrees Fahrenheit and 100 degrees Celsius had remained the exact same as it was before. Freudian slip, by the way. However, from this experiment, Pasteur deduced something far more valuable in science and medicine today that we know. He deduced something and concluded something called pasteurization. Get it? Pasteurization. Okay. Anyway, the point was that he came up with a theory that we all use today now, that if you boil liquid or food to a certain degree, it will eliminate all the threatening germs inside of it. And though now every liquid and food item that is basically sold in any manufactured store has been pasteurized to around 112 or sometimes to be safe 136 degrees Fahrenheit, the problem is that it also gets rid of the nutrients that some foods are rich with, which give us health benefits. However, many scientists today still prefer pasteurization as a well-known safe theory to use whenever selling foods. So, next time you think of your food, think about how it came from a major experiment that took 500 years to prove wrong, with a thing that I know is a little hard to wrap your head around, but that matter doesn't come from other matter.